Hello and welcome. I'm Carolyn Grimminger with the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Our program's mission is to nourish the mind and the spirit and to serve social justice. Our forums occur on most Sundays at noon and are free and open to the public. We encourage you to attend. Our church is located at 4700 Grover Avenue in Austin, Texas. For more information about our Public Affairs Forum, you can go to our church website at www.austinuu.org. And now Eric Hartman will introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Carolyn. I have worked around the state capitol for more years than I care to remember, probably almost 40 years now. And in all of that time, I have never encountered a better advocate for Texas children than our speaker today, Scott McCown. He has combined high intellectual rigor, political smarts, a lawyer's persuasive skills, and moral passion in a lifetime's work for the children of our state. As a state district judge for many years, he became the leading voice driving the legal argument for adequate and equitable school funding for our school children. As director of the Center for Public Policy Priorities, he framed the best arguments for adequate funding for education and health care and other public services for children and other Texans in need. Now, as director of the University of Texas Law School's Children's Rights Clinic, he is fighting for decent treatment of foster children and adequate resources to address child abuse and neglect. Please join me in welcoming Scott McCown.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that kind introduction from Eric. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience and a lot of experts on this very subject. So I look forward to talking with you about it. I feel a little like I'm giving a TED Talk with this fancy headset here. That's pretty cool. But Eric asked me to come out today and talk to you all about Child Protective Services and about what's happening in our state. And that was kind of prompted by a recent ruling in December by a federal district court that our system was unconstitutional, that it was subjecting children to an unreasonable risk of harm. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the system and that case and about where we go from here. And I got into this work back in 1989 when I became a district judge here in Travis County and began hearing child protection cases. And at one point, another judge and I split the docket and each heard half of the county's cases. And I did that for a long time and really got interested in not just the individual cases, but in the system. And you can think of Child Protective Services like a rescue boat on the ocean. So you've got Child Protective Services, and they rush to any call of a sinking ship, and with children aboard, and they do one of several things. They either help the parents right their own boat so that the parents can safely care for the children, or they'll bring the children temporarily onto the state's rescue boat while they find an extended family member, kinship care that can care for the children, or while they find an adoptive home that will care for the children. And then if push comes to shove, there's some children that are raised on the state's boat. They never find another boat of their own and are raised by the state. And so that's, generally speaking, what Child Protective Services does. And let's look at our first slide, April. So I'm not going to go through this whole schematic, which is complicated, but I wanted to give it to you for your reference. On the right hand is the criminal justice system, which also responds to child abuse and neglect. And on the left hand is the civil justice system, which responds to child abuse and neglect. And many people's first question is, child abuse is a horrible thing, child neglect is a horrible thing. Why don't we just deal with it all through the criminal justice system? And there's a couple of problems with thinking about dealing with it all through the criminal justice system. First, you would be offering less protection to children. Because, as you know, a criminal case has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And so for the criminal justice system to respond, it has to be a case where they can ultimately prove that there was a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. And the civil system operates on a different standard. It's looking at the safety and well-being of the children. And it's operating with a different burden of proof. In the family court, you don't have to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. So if you shifted it all to the criminal side, you wouldn't be able to provide as much protection to children. But the other problem on the criminal side is that the criminal justice system deals with just the person accused of a crime. The question still is, well, what are you going to do with the children? And so the real role of the civil justice system, the family court, is to figure out how to find the child a safe, permanent home where they can be raised to adulthood. And so it has a different function. Now, the next slide that April's going to show us will give you some insight into understanding Texas. So here is the key problem that we have in Texas, which is we have a vast, vast ocean with lots of sinking ships for child protection to patrol. And we have a tiny rescue boat. So it's a twofold, a vast ocean and a tiny rescue boat. So let's look at the size of the ocean. We've got 7.3 million children in Texas. We have this huge child population. In the last census in 2010, from 2000, the census right before, to the last census in 2010, the entire child population in America grew, and Texas was half the growth for the entire country. So we are a very large state. We have a high birth rate. We have immigration. We have lots of kids. And so you've got 7.3 million children in the state of Texas. Then 1.7 million live in poverty. So we have a large number, I guess that's about, 1 in 4, 1 in 5, that live in poverty. A very large number who are at risk for child abuse and neglect, at greater risk for child abuse and neglect. And you know from your study as a social justice forum that Texas has a very tattered and torn safety net. So we don't offer a lot of the supports to families that other states offer. So we've got a lot of kids in poverty, and we offer less community support for them. So we're going to see in our state a lot of child abuse and neglect. So almost 300,000 alleged victims of child abuse and neglect a year. So that's a lot of kids who are alleged victims of child abuse and neglect. And of those, we only open cases for about 75,000. So we're opening cases for about 75,000 kids a year. And that relates to our small boat. Vast ocean, small boat. Most of those are in family-based safety services. So about 72% of all the kids that we help are actually left on the parents' boat, and we try to help the parents make that a safe boat. I think if you can advance that, yes. And about 21,000 are offered conservatorship services, where the state actually steps in and becomes a temporary guardian of the child. So a tremendous amount are helped in the community. A few are actually brought aboard the boat. Now let's look at the community. We can look at this next slide. This is better. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, let's look at our removal rate. So sometimes you'll hear people say that the key to the problem is prevention. That we should put our money into child abuse and neglect prevention, into basic services to help families. And that's true in the long run. Just like in your home, the key to keeping you and your family safe is perhaps a smoke detector. That's prevention. The smoke detector keeps you safe at a very low cost. But if your house is actually on fire and burning down, adding a smoke detector doesn't help, right? So that's the problem that you face, is that prevention is a strategy for the long run, not a strategy for the immediate situation that you've got. So we've got a lot of kids in immediate trouble. Sometimes you'll hear critics say, states bring too many children into foster care. And if we just brought fewer kids into foster care, we could get a handle on the problem. Well, there's a tremendous variation across the country in how many kids are brought into foster care. And certainly you need a strong system that brings as few kids into foster care as possible. You're much better off helping families keep their own boat afloat and rushing services to families in trouble than you are bringing a child into foster care. Once you bring a child into care, the expense is astronomical, and the money would be better spent on helping families. But here's the rub for us. We already bring kids into foster care at half the national average. So let's go ahead in April and put the rest of this chart up. First, you're going to see the U.S. average, that blue line, and this is per 1,000 children. So in 2002, in the United States, the average was that 4 children came into foster care for every 1,000 children in the general population. And the country has made a concerted effort to reduce that. And so you can see that by 2013, it had fallen to 3.5 children coming into care for every 1,000 kids in the general population. But then look at Texas. Texas is at 1.9, goes up, and then goes down, and settles in 2013 at 2.4. So Texas already brings in about half the average that other states bring in. And to kind of see the impact on that, we're bringing in roughly 18,000 children a year into care. Now keep in mind, we have 7.3 million kids. We only bring 18,000 kids a year into care. And that's half the national average. If we were at the national average, we would bring an additional 9,000 kids a year into care. Now I want to play with that number a minute and imagine a couple of things. First, let's think about the 18,000. Does that seem high, low, just about right? Think about all of the mental illness. Think about all of the parents who go to prison, and you may well think they shouldn't, but under the system they do. So think about all the parents in prison, all of the drug abuse, all of the poverty, 7 million kids. Does it strike you as unreasonable that maybe 18,000 can't be in their home in a year? That number doesn't seem high to me. It seems kind of unrealistic to think it could be much lower, and it's already half the national average. Most practitioners in the field who actually look at cases will tell you the number's not high enough, that we leave kids in dangerous homes, that we don't bring enough kids into care. Now let's think about that rate a minute, the other number, 9,000. And this goes to how small our boat is. We have a boat that's struggling to pick up 18,000 kids from sinking ships. Imagine if that same boat had to pick up another 9,000 more. It would be swamped. So I say all this
to say, yes, we need to do prevention, but it's not going to be a solution to the problem that's in front of us today. Just like the smoke alarm's not a solution to the house on fire. And yes, we need to have a stringent system that brings as few kids into care as possible. Kids are better off at home. But realistically, we're not going to reduce the number of kids that come into care very much. So that's, I think, an important slide. So let's look at the kids that we do leave in the community. The next slide, April. And go ahead and put it up for us all together. So what you see, family-based safety services, is when CPS, the rescue boat, rushes to the scene of a sinking ship, but instead of pulling the kids off the ship, it offers the family immediate help to try to keep the kids at home. So as the year begins, we'll have about 32,000 kids in family-based safety services. Another 55,000 will enter during the year. You'll have about 86,000 that you work with at some point in the year. You'll help and close about cases for about 52,000. Most of those will be in their own homes. At the end of the year, you'll have been successful. A few will have to be removed. So about 8% of all removals come out of working with families. And at the end of the year, you'll continue to work with about 33,000 families. So that's the flow of what we're doing in the community. Instead of pulling kids aboard the boat, and this number, 8%, is when we tried to work with them in the community. We weren't successful. We have to pull them aboard the boat. Let's take a look at the next slide. So these are the numbers for the kids that we pull aboard the boat. Go ahead and put it all up, April. So when the year begins, we have about 30,000 kids in care. And as the year moves forward, we're going to take in about 18,000 kids. So we're going to start with 30. We're going to take in about 18,000. So we've got roughly 47,000 in care at some point during the year. But throughout the year, we'll get 17,000 off. So 17,000 kids will be on the boat and then off. And where will they go? Well, roughly a third will go home. So roughly a third of the time, and that's the department's highest goal, that's success for the system. You get there, you take a child temporarily on the boat, but you help the parents maybe with a mental health problem or a drug problem, and the problem will get resolved. It'll get fixed, and then you'll be able to put the child back on the parent's boat. That happens in about a third of all the cases. And then, in about 45% of the cases, extended family will be the solution. You'll find grandmother, granddad, aunt, uncle, adult brother or sister, somebody in the family will step up, and they will either become the permanent guardians or they will actually adopt the child, but it will be family 45% of the time. Sometimes parents can't get it done, extended family can't get it done, and you'll have an adoption by non-kin about 16% of the time. And then you'll have, in about 7% of the cases, roughly 1,300 kids a year who will have grown up in the system. They will age out. They will leave the state's boat for a life on their own. And they won't have had that permanent home. For those kids that are still in custody, about 8% will be in their own home working with the department. About 38% will be in a kinship home. About 52% will be in foster care, and then there's about 1,000 sort of offbeat placements, one sort or another. So that's where the kids are living while they're on the state's boat. Now, the Federal District Court, which in December found our system unconstitutional, was really not about the whole child protection system. It was really only about those cases where the children had you had moved from the temporary stage to where the state was the managing conservator, they were living on the state's boat, and they were going to age out on the state's boat unless you could find another placement. So the state does not do a great job as a parent. And so the kids that age out on the state's boat tend to have a lot of different foster placements. They tend to get moved from foster home to foster home. And they tend not to have their educational needs met, and they don't necessarily have a high school diploma. They don't have a driver's license. They don't have a work history. And they're 18. And now it used to be when you were 18, we pushed you off the state's boat straight into the water, sink or swim. It's been a while since we've done that. Now we have a system where if you're 18 and you're still in school, you can stay in state care, and we carry you until you're 21. And one of the things that we got from Obamacare that's been incredibly helpful to foster kids is that just like foster kids, just like your own children can stay on your health care until they turn 26, foster children continue to get Medicaid until they turn 26. So we're doing a better job, and we're trying to do a better job with the kids who age out. But that's very difficult because their parents have failed them, their extended family wasn't there or has failed them, nobody's adopted them, they're being raised on the state's boat, and it's heartbreaking. And if you read the judge's decision about what their lives are like, I would be amazed if you could do it without crying. It's a tough, tough situation. So the judge pointed out kind of some big picture problems that we have. We don't have enough foster homes. She refers to that as an inadequate placement array. We do not have enough foster homes. Well, let's talk about that a minute. You can see 52% of the kids in state custody are in foster care, at least temporarily, and some of them are going to grow up in foster care. Why don't we have enough foster homes? Well, we haven't changed our mindset about foster parents. We tend to think of foster parents as do-gooders who volunteer to open up their home because they have an extra bedroom for some child who needs the home. And we give them a little bit of money to underwrite that, but it's basically voluntary philanthropic work. Modern foster care, if foster care was ever like that, modern foster care is not like that. A modern foster parent is a member of a professional treatment team. And they are taking a child who's been subjected to serious trauma, serious chronic neglect into their home, and they are part of a treatment plan to heal the child and make it possible for them to return to parents or with kin, or to make it possible for them to be adopted. So they're trained, they're supervised, they are professionals, part of a treatment team. And they work for what the system calls a child placing agency, a CPA, a child placing agency, some foster care network who has caseworkers that support them. Well, first, a network, a foster care provider who goes out and recruits them, who trains them, who places the child in their home, who supports them, makes them part of the treatment team. So that's a whole piece, not done by the state any longer, but done by private providers. Some may have a religious mission, some may have a charitable mission, some may be for-profit, but they're all private providers attempting to support the foster parents. The state of Texas only pays 80% of the cost of foster care. And that's why we don't have enough foster homes. Because we're asking somebody else to absorb that 20%. Well, who is that somebody else? Well, that is the churches and the philanthropies of Texas. They can't cover the 20% now. But we would be asking them, if we wanted more, to cover 20% of even a larger slice. And they can't do it. So That's why we don't have an adequate foster placement array. It's also become more difficult to recruit foster parents in the modern world. In the old days, you might have dad at work and mom at home, and she's maybe raising her own kids and takes in some foster kids, or maybe dad's at work, mom's at home, their kids are grown, they take in some foster kids. But you keep hearing the key, dad's at work, mom's at home, right? That is not the economic model in America anymore. Now, dad's at work, mom's at work. And you have to provide daycare for the kids. And the other huge issue about foster care that is going to surprise you is traffic. Foster parents do a tremendous amount of transporting. Foster kids have to be everywhere that your own kids ever had to be. They have to be at school and at extracurricular activities and all around. And they have to be at psychologist offices and doctor's offices and court hearings. And it becomes a huge issue, the transport in the modern traffic world in our urban counties. And so you add all this up together, and we have this is national, this is not just in Texas, but the foster care system is anchored by, and this won't surprise you, some of you will fall into this category, the foster care system is anchored by aging baby boomers who are beginning to close foster homes. And we don't have young people coming up behind them opening new foster homes because of the reasons I've talked about. So we don't have the number of foster homes that we need. Okay? The court also focused on casework turnover and on caseloads. And so I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Let's look at the next slide, April. Yeah, go ahead and put this up. So we're going to see how children have left the system over time. And let's start at the top. At 2003, 37% of the kids went home to a parent, ultimately. And you'll see that that's fallen to 31% going home now. So we're not doing as good a job getting kids home to parents. I'm not sure why that is. If we're not doing as good a job, if the parents' troubles are more extensive, or it could simply be that we're not giving parents the time we used to give them, because look where kids are going. So in 2003, 31% went with a relative. That skyrocketed to 45%. So we are using relatives. We are locating, identifying extended family, and using relatives to take care of kids. So that's a good thing. Relatives generally do a better job than the state, but we may be at the limits of what that policy can do for us. And then you'll see that those children who leave by non-relative adoption has basically been flat. Fallen a little bit in recent years, but basically it's flat. And then successfully, the number of kids that are aging out has dropped a little bit. So we've been more successful and gotten kids home who've been aging out. Now, let's look at the next slide. So Eric will be really interested in this slide. We have a tremendous amount of turnover with our caseworkers. 25% annual turnover. Imagine trying to run your business if 25% of your employees were leaving each year. And in many ways, that turnover rate is understated. And I won't go into all the technical reasons it's understated, but it is understated. So, tremendous loss of caseworkers. And that's one of the things that the federal judge criticized. Now, the caseworker, when you pull that child aboard the state's boat, they're assigned to a caseworker who becomes responsible for them. So everything about their life, do they get the education they need? Do they get the medical care they need? Are they in the right placement? Everything about their life turns on that caseworker. They become like the substitute parent, advocating and checking to make sure that child's needs are met. And that is a hard job. And we have case loads that are double what they should be. And again, that may be understated. But we have caseworkers responsible easily for 30, 35, sometimes 40 or more kids. Imagine, think of all the time you spent as the case manager for your own children. Right? Big job. Now imagine having 40 of them. And you can see why we have a lot of turnover. But what's really hard to figure out is why anybody would leave when we've got these golden handcuffs on them. We're paying them $34,000 a year. $34,000 a year. And they depart. So it's no wonder we have this huge turnover. We don't pay a wage that you could have your own family on, $34,000 a year, and we load you up with double the work you can do, and then we put you in charge of life or death decisions. And if somebody does die, if a child does die, we come down on you like a ton of bricks. So, what do we need to do? Well, we need to get caseworker salaries up to where teacher salaries are. And this chart shows you it's broken up, the state's divided into regions, so it's broken up into regions, but you can look just at the state average if you want on the far left. The first bar is the average CPS worker's salary. The second bar is the average teacher's salary. And then you look at the teacher turnover rate and the caseworker turnover rate. Now, let me begin by saying teachers are underpaid in our state. And our teacher turnover rate is way too high. But it looks great compared to our child protection salaries and rates. A teacher is making $50,000 on a 9-month contract. $50,000 on a 9-month contract. A CPS worker is making $34,000 on a 12-month contract. And teaching is very difficult, but child protection is easily as difficult, and I would say more difficult. Teacher turnover hovers around 15%, and you can see child protection turnover is around 25%. So we have to vastly increase salaries. If we did that, we could put a floor on that turnover. And then we've got to get caseloads down. And the reason we can't get caseloads down is because we can't keep people long enough to get caseloads down. We've got to get caseloads down. So those are two big picture, very expensive items. So let's see. Do I have one more chart? Nope, that's it. So that's where we are in the state of Texas with child protection. The federal court ruled in December, and the state has appealed that, or is going to appeal that, and is going to fight it to the end. We have a legislative session coming up. A lot of people are going to be over there asking the state to invest in this, and we'll see what happens. So I'll turn it over for questions.
Thank you very much. Very sobering presentation. First going to come to Glenn Williams.
Judge, you served on the Protect Our Kids Commission, which had a lot of insightful comments. One thing it did mention was prevention and talked about evidence-based. Can you tell us what prevention programs might be out there for a long-term solution, and how can we tell if they're going to be effective or not?
So that's a great question. We invest some money in prevention in the state of Texas, and some of that's done just on a common sense basis of what we think would work. Some of it's done based on scientific studies. That's the evidence-based expenditures. I am not an expert on prevention. I can't tell you what we ought to be doing with prevention. But prevention is I can tell you a couple of things. Prevention is way under scale. We don't spend near the kind of money on prevention that we should, and we need to spend our money in an effective way. There are other things that we need to do that people don't think of as prevention, but are really essential. For example, if we expanded Medicaid for adults, we would dramatically increase our ability to help parents. Many parents have mental health problems or substance abuse problems. They don't have any access to care because they don't have any health insurance. If they had Medicaid, we could treat the mental health, we could treat the substance abuse problem, we could help them keep their kids. So that's not typically thought of as a prevention program, but is an example of how our safety net is not serving us well when it comes to protecting children.
Tim Mahoney, and I practice law in this area. I know you know a lot more about the practicalities of how this system is going than I do. I think just to put it in perspective, a sizable portion of the Child Protective Services budget is actually federal money. And Judge Specia, who was the former head of Child Protective Services, was, I think, trying to do some good things. And I'm a little bit concerned about them bringing in an ex-law enforcement officer to try to drive whatever they're going to be doing for the Child Protective Services system.
Well, I mean, the comment I would make on that for y'all who don't know is that Commissioner Specia recently retired and was replaced by Commissioner Whitman, Hank Whitman, who was formerly chief of the Texas Rangers. But at the same time, they also brought in a new assistant commissioner for CPS, who some of y'all know, Christine Blackstone, who's very capable, very experienced. And I've met with Commissioner Whitman. I think he brings a lot to the table. I don't think he's going to try to take it into a law enforcement approach, but I think he is going to bring some credibility and advocacy that the system can benefit from. So I'm actually not worried. I think it's a legitimate concern. I had it myself, but my fears have been set to rest.
Thank you for this presentation, Judge McCown. Are there any legislative champions for this cause? And what would be the leading advocacy groups who might begin to put some pressure on the legislature for better support for programs for abused and neglected children?
Part of what is very frustrating to me is that this decision by the federal judge was made in December, and there's been very little reaction other than the promise to appeal it by our state leaders. So unfortunately, I can't say to you, here's the leader, they're the advocate, they're the champion, because so far that person hasn't emerged. I can tell you, kind of in terms of their official position, who's really important in all this, and that, of course, is the governor, the lieutenant governor, the speaker, Senator Schwartner in Williamson County, who heads up Senate Health and Human Services, Chairman Raymond, Representative Raymond in the Valley, who heads up House Human Services, and Senator Uresti has been a longtime champion. If you want somebody in the category of champion from Bexar County, would be Senator Uresti. So those would be the folks that are going to be looking at this and controlling where it goes. In terms of what groups you can be involved in, there's several groups. Right here in Austin is Texans Care for Children. Out of Dallas, but a group that's statewide, is Tex Protects. So there are 2 child advocacy groups that work on this area in particular.
We have a question. If you'll stand up.
Hi, my name is Abby Hausman. I think my question overlaps a bit with Bonnie's. I wanted to ask, what can the average person do who's watching this lecture or watching on a YouTube video? What's the best way to put pressure on the governor or Health and Human Services in order to have an effect on this ongoing situation?
Well, telephone calls and letters are still how politicians get reached, and also going to visit them in their offices in their districts, getting involved in the advocacy organizations is a great one. Now, I'm surprised I haven't heard anybody yet say to me, how do I become a foster parent? How do I become an adoptive parent? Because that'd be a great way to get involved in direct service and can be very rewarding. Can be challenging, but can also be very rewarding. And another way to get involved, in fact, one of your members asked me about this right before we started, is Texas CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocates. There you're not taking on the fostering or adopting responsibility, but you're becoming an advocate for a child. And that's another great way to get involved.
We have a question from Douglas Bauer.
In one of your early slides, you showed some startling statistics. I think one of them said there were 1.7 million children living below the poverty line. Could you comment on how much or what percentage of these problems with the kids are just poverty-related versus other issues?
Well, that is a fascinating question to unpack, because I'll channel Donald Trump a minute. The politically correct thing to say is that poverty doesn't cause child abuse. And that's true. The overwhelming number of poor families love their children, put them first, take care of them. The overwhelming number do not abuse or neglect their kids. By the same token, the overwhelming number of people who smoke cigarettes do not get cancer. I don't know if you knew that, but the overwhelming number of people who smoke cigarettes do not get cancer. But we know that smoking cigarettes puts you at higher risk of getting cancer. Just like living in poverty puts you at higher risk of being abused or neglected. And you just think about the issues of mental health and substance abuse. And again, I'm sure this group studied over-incarceration. We may be against it, but it happens. So lots of parents of poor kids who have going to jail or prison or are handicapped by criminal records. And then the other issue that you have is when you have single mothers who have a successive number of strangers come through the home, strange men, strange and they're not biologically related to the kids, it dramatically increases the chances of sexual abuse. And that happens in part because of over-incarceration and substance abuse and other problems. And so, I've lost the thread of your question. What role does poverty play? I mean, I think you need to understand that reality. I mean, people who deny that reality are not doing low-income families any favors. The reality is you're much greater risk of abuse or neglect in a poor family.
We have a question from Tim Mahoney.
Just to follow up on my previous question and your comment, Texas puts relatively little money in this whole system. I mean, most of it's federal dollars. If you could just say, off the top of your head, if you know what the relative percentage is.
It's about 50-50.
And there are benefits long-term benefits that people who adopt children out of the foster care system get, if you could summarize that.
Well, I mean, if you're interested in adoption, you can go to the department's website and take a look. But, there's an income tax credit for adoption. There's an adoption subsidy that's possible. The child can have Medicaid. So there are benefits that come with that, where both the federal government and the state try to facilitate and encourage adoption. Is there a question?
We have a question. Would you state your name, please?
Margaret Mills. I'm a retired social worker with the state of Texas. I spent 25 years in CPS. And thank you for your service on the bench. You were in district court when I presented a number of cases from 80 to 83 here in Travis County. And I frankly don't know of anybody who had more compassion and experience and patience with the families that came in. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
One of the things about working for CPS over these years has been that a lot of the structure of the organization puts most of the responsibility for mistakes on the worker. And being overloaded for as many years as we are, and the burnout rate that happens in that agency isn't helped by the fact that the state also hasn't paid its retirees a cost of living increase since 2000. So for 16 years, those of us who retired from the state haven't received a cost of living increase. The other part is that when folks who are upwardly mobile within the organization take on those roles, they have a lot of time to spend with legislative budget board and listening to the mandates of sitting governors who don't want the budget raised and who want to cut the budget instead. And when we have kids who are increasing in year after year within foster care, we have a real squeeze situation in which there isn't a lot more we can do, but we have more kids taken in and more workers who are burning out faster. Is there any systemic remedy that you can see for the agency, or any remedy that you can see with the legislative budget board that will allow increases when we've got governors who want to cut the budget every year so that it can be politically advantageous to the party? Thank you.
Well, we do not pay enough taxes in the state. I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, Eric could make the same presentation I just made, only about schools. And other people can do it about health care, and other people can do it about mental health, and other people can do it about roads, and other people can do it about higher education. I mean, we are underfunding our infrastructure, and I guess what frustrates me is we don't pay near the taxes that our grandparents paid. I mean, our grandparents invested in the state with a far greater percent of their personal income than we're investing. And yet, we act like we pay these incredibly heavy taxes and we just can't stand it. Now, it is true that some people pay more taxes than they should relative to others because we have a regressive tax system. We take more from poor and middle-income families than we do from upper-income families. And so I don't mean to minimize that. A lot of folks here in Austin, for example, find it difficult to stay with property taxes going up. But I'm unsympathetic in some ways because you would say to those same people, well, would you support an income tax if your property taxes went down and rich people had to pay more through income tax? No, totally against it. Well, I don't know how you address this problem. I mean, I worked at this for a long time at the Center for Public Policy Priorities and kind of gave up on trying to address it. But that's it. There's no magic bullet for CPS other than additional money. And it goes back to taxes and budgets.
We have a question from Bonnie Gardner.
Judge McCown, I know this type of research is difficult to do but credible research. Do we have research from Texas or from other states which demonstrates ultimate cost savings and benefits to society or cost effectiveness of investing in foster care and other family supports?
Well, yes. And if you go to the Tex Pro Tex website, they'll have tons of this on prevention, how prevention dollars save you money. The rub is, though, that those dollars save you money in the long run. You've got to surge today. You've got to spend more today to save money in the long run. And legislators think in terms of election to election. So it's hard to get them to think that way.
We have a question.
Thank you. I'm interested in whether or not you can cite particular model programs in Texas or in other states that you would hold up as the examples of what we ought to be doing?
So all states struggle with this. I can't point to you to a state just off the top of my head, and I've asked other people this same question who are experts nationally. There are states that do good at certain things, but a total top-to-bottom model program, that's the way it's done, I can't point you to. We do have a new program in the Fort Worth area called Foster Care Redesign, which has some very promising outcomes. We've been able to increase foster care capacity, get kids home faster, reduce the use of residential treatment. It has a lot of good outcomes, but it's costing more money than the current system. The contractor for that program's put $5 million of their own dollars into that, and that's in like a 4 or 5 county area. So anything we do, and I don't mean to say that we don't have management issues or that there aren't policies or practices that need to be changed, but anything we do that's going to make a big difference, measurable difference, is going to cost us more money.
We have about 8 minutes left, and I just wanted to make a comment. I've worked in adult probation in Travis County for 19 years, and adult. So I've had some ladies who've gone through the family CPS drug court, and it's been very motivational to me. Are you familiar with the...
Yes.
You want to speak to that?
Yeah, so let me... there's 2 things I want to say about that. First, our CPS system is, by and large, a state-based system. Other states have county-based systems where it's at the county level. And one of the discussions you'll sometimes get is, would we be better off with a county-based system than a state-based system? And the problem is that states that have a county-based system are as troubled as we are, and our counties don't get any state funds. Our counties live completely off the local property tax. So if you shifted this to a county-based system, you would be shifting the cost to the counties and the cost to poor and low-income taxpayers. It would be a bad financial deal for the counties and for the taxpayers. And then in addition, you would have tremendous variation because some counties, they couldn't do it. And other counties would do a better job perhaps, but net, I think you'd be a loser. The reason I mention that is because adult probation is a county-based system, and our criminal justice system is a county-based system, but this is a state-based system. And we do have drug courts throughout the state. Drug courts have become very popular. They move away from a punitive model into a treatment model. They hold you accountable, but they offer you treatment and support. And it's much like a CPS court, and has had measurable success.
Go ahead.
Any other questions?
We're at about 5 minutes, so
got one
do I
right
see
here.
a question? Oh, Eric.
Can't pass up the opportunity.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you if you see a significant role for school-based services in making a dent in the problem we're talking about of child abuse and neglect.
Well, there's been a lot of work on that in the last couple of years, trying to strengthen education for foster kids. And y'all should know, everybody in Texas is a mandatory reporter. So if you know about child abuse, you have a mandatory obligation to call the child abuse hotline and report it. We're all mandatory reporters, lawyers, judges, teachers, everybody. And the department has worked closely with the Texas Education Agency to try to develop foster care liaisons in every district, people who are trained to understand the foster care system and can help work out educational problems for foster kids. So there's a whole initiative. The Texas Children's Commission, if you want to go to their website, has a whole initiative on education and CPS.
I have a question from Doug Bauer.
Again, early in your presentation, you talked about the change in kind of family dynamics over the last few decades, where we've gone from basically one parent working to typically now both parents work. There's another aspect that you didn't comment on, which is what's considered a standard workday in the professional world now is different than what it was when I started my career decades ago. I don't know anybody that works a 40-hour work week. For me, I typically get done about 8 in the evening, so I'm not sure if there's a question in here. There might be of how would you expect people to be foster parents when they work these sort of grueling hours?
Well, I think that's a great question. And the question is, given modern economics, how can we expect people to be foster parents? I think we have to change our model. I think we have to provide a foster care rate that's large enough that that could be a person's job. Their job is providing foster care, so that's what they're doing full time. And we do not have that model at present, but I think we need to develop it. But again, we're only paying 80% of the cost of the model that we have. And so when you talk about enriching or strengthening the model, the cost is going to go up. So we have the legislative fix here in the next legislative session is going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's a number that's hard for them to wrap their mind around. It's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars.
I think we have time for one more question. We have a question from Larry Court.
Judge, neglect is abuse. Whether it's a building or a person or machinery, neglect is abuse. How do you report neglect of a child as abuse?
Well, you just call it into the hotline just like you do abuse. If you see that parents are not feeding a child, or that they don't have a place for the child to live, or they don't have the child in school, all those are reportable. And the department will sort out the valid reports from the invalid. So if you're thinking to yourself, this is really troubling me, I think it should be reported, but I'm not sure, maybe I shouldn't report it, well then report it. And they'll investigate it and sort it out. So there's no problem. As long as you're in good faith reporting something, there's no problem.
All right, I think we're ready to wrap things up. Thank you very much
for having me. I appreciate it.
And as I said earlier, we're now